The film begins with a nurse cautiously entering a dimly lit room. She snaps a photo with her flash to scan the area, only to be confronted by an unexpected assailant who strikes her. The assailant thrusts a lethal injection needle into her eye, causing her to convulse violently. Eventually, the nurse succumbs to her injuries, and the murderer takes her body away. In the following sequence, we observe Dr. Roger, the head of a private medical facility that specializes in treating patients in a vegetative state. He is engaged in a discussion with the facility's director regarding his ongoing research. Roger admits he is still at it, but the director cautions him that failure to produce results could lead to the withdrawal of financial support from investors. In the late afternoon, a nurse named Kathy Jacquard arrives at the hospital for an interview. She is greeted by the chief nurse, Cassidy, who appears to be in a foul mood. Not long after, Dr. Roger enters and begins to quiz Kathy on various medical scenarios. Kathy responds to each question with confidence and accuracy, convincing Dr. Roger to offer her the position. Subsequently, Kathy receives her uniform, and a fellow nurse, Paula, guides her through the facility. As they stroll, Paula discloses that Cassidy is, in fact, Dr. Roger's daughter. She explains that Dr. Roger and Cassidy choose to keep their familial bond confidential. Additionally, Paula brings up the incident where a nurse who was previously employed at the facility vanished one night, leaving the mystery unsolved. As they proceed through the corridors, Paula introduces Kathy to each patient. Upon entering room 15, they encounter a young man named Patrick, who has been in a coma for several years. Paula informs Kathy that Dr. Roger focuses particularly on Patrick, conducting an experiment on him that differs from the treatment of other patients. Patrick appears to be in relatively good condition. As Kathy approaches to say hello, Patrick unexpectedly spits at her. Fortunately, it's merely a reflex, so there's no cause for concern. Later, Kathy is by herself, cleaning the floor when she hears an unusual alarm. She turns around, only to be startled by a man with a scarred face. Kathy begins to freak out until Paula arrives and clarifies that the individual is Mr. Fraser, a patient of theirs. Fraser suffered injuries from an explosion, but miraculously came out of his coma due to the care of Dr. Roger. Paula then escorts Kathy to Fraser's room, which is adorned with numerous clocks. She goes on to say that at 0 p.m., Fraser is in charge of operating a lighthouse close by. Later that evening, Kathy is alone in her room when her ex-boyfriend, Ed, calls her. She dismisses the call with indifference and even removes his number from her phone. At that moment, Paula comes knocking on her door and inquires if Kathy is interested in going out. Kathy agrees, and they head to a bar for a beverage. At the bar, Paula introduces Kathy to a man named Brian, who is a psychiatrist by profession, but also dabbles in writing and hosting a radio show. Brian shows a keen interest in Kathy, and she finds herself drawn to him as well. The following day, Dr. Roger escorts Kathy to room 15, but cautions her not to engage in any conversation with Patrick. Once they are inside, Dr. Roger proceeds with his experiments on Patrick, administering injections and examining various areas of his body. He attempts to monitor Patrick's brain activity, but is unable to find any significant results, leading to his frustration and decision to abandon the experiment and exit the room without further ado. The setting changes to the weekend, where Kathy goes to a close-by museum and runs into Brian. While they're talking, Brian misses a call from an unfamiliar number, but chooses to overlook it and suggests they grab coffee. Kathy is pleased to accept. However, out of the blue, Brian makes a sudden move and spits on her. Kathy is repulsed and leaves in a huff. The following night, Brian returns to her place to say sorry. He claims he can't recall spitting on her and pleads for a pardon. Kathy is still hurt, but decides to forgive him and lets him in. They begin to drink and enjoy each other's company, but their night is cut short by a knock on the door. It's Kathy's ex-boyfriend, Ed, who has come to apologize and reconcile. Kathy is not in the mood and sternly tells him to go away. Yet, Ed hands over his temporary address and promises he won't leave until they resolve their issues. This news devastates Kathy, and she asks Brian to leave as well. However, as Brian is preparing to depart, he starts shaking uncontrollably, leading to him accidentally shattering a glass and severely injuring his hand. Kathy rushes him to the hospital and then goes back home. Later that evening, Brian returns to her place and they share a passionate moment. But in the midst of their intimacy, Kathy notices something alarming. Brian's face morphs into Patrick's and his skin starts to wrinkle like a mummy. Shocked, Kathy lets out a scream before waking up from a terrifying dream. It turns out the entire ordeal was just a dream the following day. At her job, Kathy witnesses Dr. Roger carrying out his distressing experiments on Patrick. After the doctor exits, Kathy confronts Patrick, who retaliates by spitting at her. Fuming, she strikes him firmly, but upon seeing him cry, she feels remorseful and offers an apology. Oddly, Patrick spits again, indicating he's attempting to convey a message. Kathy then instructs him to spit once for affirmative answers and twice for negative ones. She starts to explore different areas of his body, inquiring if he can sense them, and he answers by spitting. Excitedly, she moves on to his private areas, inquiring if he can sense that as well. Regrettably, Cassidy walks in and catches her in the act, then escorts her to the office. The head nurse reprimands Kathy for attempting to communicate with Patrick and for her inappropriate physical contact. Kathy argues that Patrick is aware, but Cassidy remains skeptical and harshly berates all the patients, expressing a wish for their demise. Amidst their dispute, Dr. Roger arrives and requests evidence of Kathy's assertion. She brings him to Patrick and requests a spit, but this time, Patrick does not react. Dr. Roger is let down and explains that the spitting might have been due to electrical signals from the medical devices attached to Patrick. That evening, the computer in Patrick's room activates on its own, showing that Patrick possesses telekinetic abilities. Patrick employs his ability to move objects with his mind to manipulate items without making physical contact. He begins scrolling through Kathy's online profiles, examining her photos. Upon discovering a picture of her with Ed, he feels a pang of jealousy. The following day, Kathy comes to Patrick by herself and inquires about his silence during the doctor's visit. Patrick, utilizing his powers, types the word secret into a nearby computer. Kathy is taken aback, but before she can react, Paula walks in and the word vanishes from the display. That night, Kathy and Ed sit down to discuss their problems in their relationship. They engage in a lengthy conversation, during which Ed heads to the kitchen to prepare a meal. At this point, he receives an unanswered call from an unknown caller. Before he can investigate, Patrick takes over and instructs Ed to touch a hot grill. Kathy enters the kitchen to find Ed's hands severely burned. She rushes him to the hospital, where the doctor informs her that Ed's nerves are so damaged he is unable to feel the pain. Despite the horrific incident, Kathy returns to the place and attempts to reach out to Patrick once more. Kathy was taken aback when he began to reply through the computer. When she inquired if he desired the doctor to cease his cruel treatment, Patrick refused when she questioned his choice to only communicate with her. Patrick disclosed that his reason for engaging with Kathy was her consistent kindness towards him. As Dr. Roger prepared to subject Patrick to another agonizing procedure, Kathy attempted to intervene, arguing that the method was barbaric. However, Dr. Roger dismissed her concerns, advising her to remain silent. That night, Kathy confided in Brian about the inhumane experiments conducted by Dr. Roger, emphasizing the urgency of their intervention to save Patrick's life. Brian was taken aback by the severity of the situation and vowed to seek assistance from his contacts in journalism. The following day, Dr. Roger confronted Kathy, furious at her for spreading false accusations about him. He accused her of being involved in Brian's inquiries. Kathy vehemently denied any knowledge of the matter and walked away. Subsequently, she assured Patrick of her support in his escape from Dr. Roger's clutches. However, Patrick expressed his reluctance to accept her help, preferring to maintain the status quo. Suddenly, at 7 o'clock, Fraser activated the lighthouse, causing the voltage to drop, which disrupted Patrick's typing. That evening, Brian visited the facility to gather more information and attempted to contact Kathy during his journey. Unfortunately, his phone overheated and his car's seat ignited. It's revealed that Patrick has gained control over his phone and the vehicle. The gas pedal is fully depressed, and the brakes have failed. Unable to manage the car, Brian crashes off a cliff and is killed. The following day, Dr. Roger resumes his research, but Kathy has had enough. She disrupts the experiment and disables the electric shock device, causing Patrick's heart rate monitor to stop. Paula begins CPR, while Kathy administers an adrenaline injection. They succeed in reviving Patrick, but Cassidy is livid and throws him out. The two nurses are dismissed. Later, Cassidy confronts her father, demanding he halt the experiments, convinced that Patrick is a bad omen and will bring ruin to everyone. Dr. Roger, however, remains determined, believing he's on the verge of a major discovery and must continue. Kathy discovers Brian's demise and is filled with rage. She accuses Dr. Roger of being responsible for Brian's death. Dr. Roger denies any involvement and dismisses Kathy immediately. The following day, Cassidy receives a lethal injection and plans to visit Kathy's home to murder her. A flashback shows that Cassidy is the culprit behind the nurse's murder at the movie's start. Upon her arrival, Cassidy warns Kathy to stay away from the clinic, admitting her and her father's involvement in horrific acts, yet claiming Patrick is the true villain. Cassidy hands Kathy a document detailing Patrick's dark history, cautioning her about the lethal power of Patrick's love over his hatred. She also reveals her intention to kill Kathy that day, citing exhaustion as her reason for backing out. After Cassidy departs, Kathy delves into the document, discovering Patrick's fixation on his mother. One incident involved his discovery of her with another man, leading to the murder of both by throwing a toaster into the bathtub, followed by an attempt to electrocute himself, resulting in a coma. Upon returning to the facility, Cassidy instructs her father to attend to a severely ill patient and requests Paula to procure medical supplies from the nearby town. Once they're away, Cassidy plans to eliminate Patrick, only to have her attempt thwarted by Patrick's telekinetic powers. Meanwhile, Kathy, who is bathing, realizes the true extent of Patrick's telekinetic powers, understanding his role in the deaths of Brian and Ed. Filled with concern, she contacts her boyfriend and informs him of the situation.